Hello and welcome to this episode of the Australian Investors Podcast. My name is Owen Rask. In this episode, I'm going to be chatting to regular guest and crowd favorite Billy Leung from Global X, and we're going to be talking about AI. But rather than just keep it high level and talk about, AI in a general way, we're actually going to go through the AI value chain. We're going to talk about different companies, different ETFs, different technologies that sit at different parts of the AI value chain that make up those ChatGPTs, those GPTs and LLMs that you hear about or use each and every day. We're going to talk about how all of those actually come together. Which companies provide the hardware, which companies provide the software, and so much more. We're going to talk about that through the lens of both companies and ETFs. It's going to be a fascinating chat for you. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Billy Leung of Global X ETFs. Billy, welcome back to the show.
Hi.
It's always good to chat. And today we're talking about AI value chain. You and I previously spoke about artificial intelligence writ large and the opportunity. And this was last year in 2024 when things were really heating up for people. But today we're going to peel back a layer and we're going to look at it as if it's a conveyor belt of what are the different parts that go from, where a consumer interacts with something right back to how does it actually think? How do I receive that message, so to speak? So we're going to go through all of that. Now, I've asked you off air about something, which I think is perfectly reasonable to ask you this right now, of something that's like caught your attention recently. So like a technology, or doesn't have to be specifically AI. So something that you were like, this is cool, like imagination type thing. What would that be?
Yeah, I think robotics is definitely one thing that's really been of my interest, not just from personal innovative, but also even I'm seeing some listed companies which are doing the right thing. And, there's a company which I've been discussing with clients, it's still small. It's listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange called UBTech. And this company is building out humanoid robots. And these humanoid robots are being installed in various factories in China, but one of the key ones was being installed into a factory called Zeekr's factory. So Zeekr makes automobiles and EVs. And right now, I don't know the exact number, but I can guess probably over 90 or 99% of that factory is from robots. And there's a video that I hope that everyone can sort of go online. It's on YouTube. It's from UBTech and Zeekr. And look, the entire factory is just robots building vehicles. and that's just an incredible sight. Like I would never guess that this sort of entire value chain could be done by robots. And it's something like from a futuristic movie.
I'm going to write that down now. I was lucky enough to play host to a futurist. This was a while ago, Billy. And he said the future of technology is where the software talks to something in the real world. So a lot of us, like here with the MacBook, I'm physically typing something into the computer. The computer is software, like it's hardware as a frame, but it's software running a computation. But he was like, what's on the other end? Like imagine if like the AI is doing something or there's a robotics process, you transfer, bits to actual interaction with the human world. And this is a perfect example of that, right? Like today we need 10 cars. So you press a button and out there in the factory, things just turn on and it just does something and a car comes out the other end. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good way to put it. And, my view is that, it's exactly when sort of that software combines with hardware and becomes something of exactly what you're saying, something that we would expect, us to sort of have some intervention, but now it's mostly just all computerized.
Yeah. And you can see all the companies across the world, like, even at the Tesla, I don't even know what they call them, when they have like the big events where they show the cars and the technology and stuff. They had the humanoid robots. I can't remember if it's called Primus or something, or I can't remember what it's called. But that was kind of like a bit shaky. But then you see stuff like, is it Boston Dynamics? Yeah, and they're making stuff. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point, because I think one of the things that's been a key hurdle for robotics has been that software part, has been that intelligence. And I think with the advent with the development of AI, what we're seeing now, this has becoming I guess much more realistic and much more commercialized.
Yeah. So I wanted to peel back a layer and talk to you about the AI value chain. let's first define what we mean by that. Like when someone in investing or business or any industry talks about the value chain, what are we talking about?
Yeah. So for this value chain, I sometimes don't like the word value chain because it implies that there is a start and there's an end.
Right.
And look, I guess the chain is, but how I look at, and I think we've talked about this before, is that I do believe not just AI, but innovation is more of a circular motion. We start from a hardware. There's always a hardware sort of being invented that's been a major breakthrough, and then people find uses for the hardware that builds out that infrastructure. So just to sort of use an example, the classic example of PC, Intel had a great chip during the 1980s. There was a good use case of it. It got applied to the infrastructure, which I will call the actual PC computers. That's when sort of Intel came in. But the sort of the final part of it, or not the final part, or the part that goes after it is the software and monetization. That's when Microsoft Windows came in. Okay, but then you have to realize that innovation is a circular motion. We went from very strong chips, we had very good PCs, we had very good software. It doesn't end there. The software requires stronger hardware. Hardware got better, went to infrastructure. So right now we've got better chips, we've got better PCs and better software. And to your sort of point is that I see the same thing with AI. We talk about, obviously these different value chains, but we are going to see different parts, I guess, performing at one time, but at the same time, it's this circular motion.
This summary here, these 3 dot points, was written by AI, Billy. It says hardware is the brain, infrastructure is the plumbing, and software is the interface.
Okay. I like that. I like that. Yeah. Infrastructure will probably give like the hands and the legs as well.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay. Where do you see, like you and I just a minute ago, we're talking about something completely different here in the Global X boardroom in Sydney. Where do you see the spending going? Like where are the dollars being invested right now? If we think about those 3 areas, where is that money going?
Yeah. So again, look, I think it's a circular motion. One thing's at like increase does not mean the other things end. So in terms of where I've seen in the past is that we've seen a lot of improvement and a lot of investments in semiconductor in the past 10 years. Everyone knows this. The rise of NVIDIA has established from this. What I'm also seeing now is that this is becoming the shift now. We're shifting from we've got very strong chips now. Now, where's the next part? We actually have a demand for better infrastructure, whether it be energy sources, whether it be like data centers. These has to improve in order to suffice this whole evolution. Now, there's also that third part, which is where we're getting really good chips. We're getting really good infrastructure. We have cloud analytics. We have these large language models. How can we use it to make money? How can we use it to commercialize? What are the use cases? And that goes back to our previous analogy of PC, where there was really good Intel chips, there was really good PCs. Now, where's that next app? Where's that next Microsoft Windows? And I keep using this sort of reference back even to mobile phones. If you recall back in the days, mobile phones, probably about 15, 16 years ago, smartphones, when they first came out, the adoption rate was really slow.
Yeah.
The only sort of spike up in adoption rate was when there was killer apps, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Angry Birds. It was the killer apps that really pushed the adoption and also pushed the monetization. That was where the real buck's in. So to answer your question, I think we are seeing more and more invested in sort of those middle parts, the infrastructure and also the adoption and monetization side right now.
Yeah, because it wasn't like really until the App Store became a thing, right?
I think so, yeah.
Because then other developers could build into the ecosystem, which then made it more valuable for everyone.
Exactly. And look, just to give you some numbers, when the first sort of adoption rate for smartphones, it was from like 10% to 14%. It was swinging around there, which is great. It was when the apps came in that went 14% to like 50% adoption rate. It was because of the apps and the App Store as well.
Yeah, wow. Last time I think I was here talking to you in Sydney, we were talking about DeepSeek and how that was kind of, and I think you made a great point then. You said that, in effect, they didn't need to spend nearly as much on the chips and stuff. They just used great software. And they proved that you didn't always need to bury billions and billions and billions of dollars into the hardware in order to have a good piece of software. Do you still think that's the case?
I think that's exactly what I said. But I also think the sort of real meaning is that we've found a shortcut. We found a shortcut in terms of going from A to maybe C. A to B, C, we've sort of skipped that. But it doesn't mean that, we need to sort of stop at C. So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, we found a cheaper way to get to a certain point of inference or training, etc. But it also means that there still needs to be sort of more investment in terms of how to improve it as well. So I'm not trying to downplay or how much investment that's going to it, but just to sort of give you an idea, there's sort of two parts to artificial intelligence. There's training, which is how to sort of train the machine to do something, but there's also inference, which is trying to ensure that they know what they're doing when they're sort of what they've learned. And, what we found was that, with DeepSeek, they've allowed that sort of training part to become much cheaper, but then we also need to spend on the inference part. So there's always parts where there needs to be investment in terms of innovation. So I guess my point would be, yes, we did find a cheaper solution or cost savings in one part of AI development, but it doesn't mean that people can now scale back and not invest. It just means it's different areas.
If we think about the different parts of the ecosystem a bit more, so here I've got in front of me the kind of the AI hardware component. So the PC analogy is perfect before, right? One of the things that you mentioned before was NVIDIA and semiconductors. Like there's a semiconductor ETF by Global X, right? So why are, for people that are just really unfamiliar, why are semiconductors a thing? Like why are they important to this entire ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that goes back to your analogy of being the brain of the entire system. So, we still need the brain whether or not where we focused on. So I think this is what really powers and really powers the entire AI value chain, because we need that chipset in order to make every single thing work. So, and we also need to understand that whenever people look at this value chain, they look at semiconductors, they always think NVIDIA. But NVIDIA is only one part of the entire even semiconductor value chain. And look at the semiconductors. There's companies that actually build the machineries. There are companies that actually stamp the actual chips out. There's companies that actually do other parts such as cleaning the wafer parts of the chips. We have to understand that there is so much depth within the semiconductors. So I think, look, in terms of the semiconductors, there's still a lot of growth. Again, there's a little sort of parts and moving parts there. But I think, this is still a major sort of driver of artificial intelligence, because like I said, whenever we have better apps or better solutions, we still need better hardware to drive even stronger monetization.
Would you drop robotics and automation into this camp?
Yeah, I would initially. I think that's probably before, when sort of there's more picking up in terms of large language modeling and the ability of machine training. Robotics was at that time, I wouldn't call it robotics, more of an automation, industrial automation. But so at that point, that would be more on the hardware side. But what we're seeing right now is that the sort of unclear line of, when we have automation, which is more smarter, self-thinking, ability to actually do a lot of human interactions, are we moving that into more the adoption or enabler side? And I think that's something we have to see in the next probably 5 to 10 years as well.
Yeah, there's some questions here about the enabler side in just a moment. I think that whole interaction with the physical world is a way for people to understand that kind of what could be a next frontier in many respects, right? I remember you would remember this. Remember 3D printing? Because that was a whole conversation about, and this was like, for people that aren't familiar, these are like printers that create 3D products, and they're still used in like some manufacturing instances or even in medical instances. But at the time, a big play on that was like, well, this is from a pro-America, bring manufacturing back to America, use these robots to do these tasks, right? But that was kind of like a really like, I guess, short-term fad thing. But what we're seeing more broadly is like this scope to, as you said with like the Zika thing, is to have like actual manufacturing done, way more productivity from the same amount of CapEx.
Yeah, I think so. It's also, I would also say that it's also about the use cases found with that. And I think, to sort of give more respect to 3D printing is, I think maybe it's just not the time. I think maybe when we get to a sort of a more time when, one thing which I looked at and we could share later is that there's considerations of using 3D printing for building houses.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because they're using it at like third world countries where there's not enough labor, not enough resources. And with 3D printing, they can actually build a house. And obviously it's not that easy, but imagine when AI takes over, or when there's much more fluid with AI interactions, and we could just go a computer go bloop, maybe can you build a house here or with that specification? This could have very, very good use cases. But I agree with you, maybe sometimes, it's not the right timing. and it needs that evolution of some different areas of aspects.
So in this camp, there's robo,
Yes.
global automatics and global automation and robotics.
Yes.
And semi fits straight in here. I'd like to move into the infrastructure component.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this is probably that second part of the cycle. Yep. When you think about the types of businesses that we're putting in here, can you think of examples off the top of your head of businesses that fit neatly in here?
Yeah, this is something that we've been discussing a lot with clients, and mainly because I think this is the segment where it's being overlooked and misunderstood. Because whenever people think about hardware, yes, semiconductor. Whenever people think software, Meta, Google, Amazon.
Yep.
But when they think of infrastructure, the first thing is data center. And it's very simple, but it's much more in-depth than that. So when you look at the whole entire, I guess, effort or commitment that goes into AI infrastructure, it's all the things that's happening behind the data center. So, building a data center is not that easy. So just to give you a context, if building a data center was $100, the land is only $10 to $15. The construction cost is only $10. About $70 to $80 is actually the electrical components, the mechanical components, and the IT peripherals. And I think this is something, to go back to your question, is that's being overlooked. What are the companies providing all these connectors, these wiring, these support, these computers into these data centers? And one would think that this is really simple, but there's actually a lot of art that goes into it. Some companies that, are making the actual connections and all these wiring on all these sort of different connecting data center server connectings. A lot of thought is going into it because they need to save power, they need to be efficient, they need to be resistant. And the amount of innovation that's going into these little parts, maybe even a cord, is incredible, and we don't know about this.
Yeah, I'm always blown away by that because even a simple thing as like a charger for your phone, if you get like a proper one, it's crazy the amount of technology that just goes into a charger. You think, well, there's one for $2, there's one for $40. What's the difference? But there is a difference. If you put them through an X-ray or something, you see the components inside. It's incredible.
It is, and everyone thinks everyone thinks because everything's wireless right now, people don't give note to these hardware connections. And I don't know if we spoke about this before, but I was in a trading firm before, and a lot of actually investments was being put into server constructions.
I can imagine
with the trading, and we spent millions of dollars just moving the server closer to the mainframe, changing the connections to maybe gold wire or different material. That was a lot of money spent there just to sort of improve that. And so, look, I'm not saying this is the high techie stuff, but again, a lot of this is overlooked when we do look at artificial intelligence.
Do you see that infrastructure as being a bottleneck?
I somewhat see it. I mean, just to share some numbers with you. So if you look at the global power demand from data center, it's growing on average about 9% per annum, and possibly for the next few years as well. So we're seeing that kind of growth. In the US, this is probably high at about 11% per annum. But if you look at the grid infrastructure growth, so the actual infrastructure that goes within data center, it's only growing at 2 to 3% per annum. So it's not apple to apple, power demand and infrastructure growth, but what we're seeing is that there is a huge rapid demand for power related to this center, but the infrastructure is just not being spent on. So I would say it's a bottleneck. People do realize it now. People do need to invest in it. The companies there, I would say, are at a very sweet spot.
There's an ETF that we haven't spoken about on the show ever, which is AINF.
Okay.
What does it do?
So AINF is our Global X AI, or Artificial Intelligence Infrastructure ETF. And when we say this,
just this part of
exactly. And it's probably going back to what we just discussed, because when we say infrastructure, AI infrastructure, everyone's asking me, hey, Billy, is it just data center? I'm like, no. This is sort of what goes behind the data center, the picks and shovels that goes into creating this. And this is exactly where the bottleneck is, because power demand is going up, but the infrastructure is not. And so what we try to do with this fund is we try to capture three elements: the power and energy components that go into a data center. So I think we talked about this in terms of the wirings, the connectors, all these are going to power management. We'll also look at the energy management. So this is, interestingly, a lot of companies that are doing the cooling systems for data center. So as you can imagine, large infrastructure, very, very hot, running 24 hours a day. We need strong cooling systems and automation system as well. But one part that this fund, the AINF fund, has that people overlook is also that energy and raw materials that go into it. So copper is actually being one of the biggest components used in wiring of data center. I mean, the estimate is that about 6% of the worldwide copper production will be going into data centers. And so that's going to be one part of the infrastructure side, and also the energy, which is where we look at nuclear and also uranium as well. So the components in the fund is essentially power management, energy management, and also that sort of raw materials and energy part, which we think captures that, we just discussed, the depth of AI infrastructure.
What percentage of copper did you just say going to
So the estimates, I have to look at the source for you, but going forward, they expect like 6% of the global production of copper will be demanded from data centers.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is really big. So I mean, copper was never had much use case for this use case, but this is a lot is going to actual data center related to AI, which as well.
Because when you think about that, there's so many other things like electric cars, power grids.
Exactly.
So many other things. Just even here in this building, there's wiring everywhere. Right? So that's a lot.
Exactly. So I think that's, people look at it like a commodity play, but we look at it as if, look, we need to understand that there is a strong thematic structural shift behind copper as well, and also uranium.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll call out the funds, Wire, Atom, some of the funds that people can take a look at on the website. So the final segment, if you will, is software and platforms. Now, you mentioned some of the companies before, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta. We spoke otherwise about things like Alibaba and these types of businesses, DeepSeek. So these are the businesses that I'd say most people interact with nowadays. They don't see a lot of the data centers or infrastructure. But this layer is where people spend most of their time thinking, could I invest in this? Could I go with that? Obviously, we know these names. Is that, in your opinion, is that where people should be focusing, or are there other like adjacent parts of this ecosystem that are untapped, so to speak?
Yeah, look, there's definitely untapped parts, and I think this sounds a little cliche, but I think in terms of the innovative names I see right now, this should always form part of your core tech portfolio. Okay? Right. And what I mean by that is that there is some space in your portfolio that you should always be holding, like Amazon, Google's, Microsoft, and even the Chinese tech names that we've just mentioned, like Alibaba, like you mentioned. Yeah. Mainly because these have been strong platform drivers. They're a strong platform. They've got user bases. They've got the brand name, and more importantly, they've got the cash flow, which means they can sustain. So I think these should form it. And to go back to question, if these form your core positioning in the thematic or in the innovation sector, when you do have a tilt, for example, right now, if Owen, you believe that infrastructure, you have a strong conviction, then maybe you have a sort of a satellite thematic that tilts into sort of that AI infrastructure. Or when you believe, no, I think semiconductor is hitting a bottleneck and these companies are going to benefit, maybe I'll sort of go into semi. So I think sort of the software side will always be ones where they're always going to be opportunities, and you should always be exposed to. And to me, it's always like managing a multi-asset portfolio. It's very, very rare you will not have equities in your portfolio. Yeah. And in my view is that you will very, very rare you will not have platform or software names, because that's where the monetization happens.
Yeah. One of the adjacents I was thinking could even be cybersecurity. Yeah. Because all of this creates, if we're creating this beast of a AI engine globally, hardware, infrastructure, software, there's a lot of risk also.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, because when you asked me about robotics is still now gradually moving from sort of hardware into sort of that adoption place. But I think cybersecurity is one which is already in that space. We've seen major companies in the cybersecurity space adopting AI, using AI, and actually requiring users to pay for the service. And so I think that's a very good example. And I would agree with that these adjacent sectors are already monetizing on it. And then we've seen a lot of software companies actually benefiting it.
It's interesting because like a lot of the, even the government here in Australia is telling people that, and businesses, that you have to be at this standard. You have to be at the standard of, I learned this recently from one of our clients, is the Essential 8, which is like a cybersecurity framework here that's like the minimum standard for like everyone to get to. And for us in finance, we have to be at it, like basically. So it's been really, really interesting to kind of get a handle on that. I want to ask you, there's another ETF in the Global X range, which we haven't really spoken about, which is GXAI. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it's put together?
Yeah, so GXAI to me would be that sort of top layer of artificial intelligence that everyone needs to sort of look at it. Just to borrow a quote from one of our US colleagues, he did say that in the future, there's only going to be two kinds of companies. Ones that use AI and ones that don't exist. So I think the key message is that, look, this is something that you need to be invested in. So, to me, this is one of the reasons why we have GXAI. Now, if you look at GXAI, it's a big portfolio, about 85 companies, but bear in mind it's global. This is a global universe of 85 companies of, selection from companies that are using AI, that are developing AI, that has the hardware to develop AI, or that are in quantum computing. And the key there is to really capture that, monetization ability, or to actually have that full value chain exposure. And it sort of goes back to our example of where I said, look, if you like AI or you believe that AI is the future, have the GXAI. But, if you do believe there's a really good opportunity with semiconductors, tilt that with the semi ETF.
Gotcha.
If you believe in AI infrastructure, tilt it with the AI infrastructure ETF. Or if you really go, look, I really believe strongly with the adopters and enablers, we have the FANG ETF, which has all the top innovators and adopters in the US. And that's how I look at it from a more portfolio perspective. It's always going to be there, from big names to small names. And it's an 85 selection portfolio.
I like how you did the core and satellite within the kind of...
thematic range.
yeah, exactly as well. When you look across the world and you think about, like, if people are more value oriented, do you see this being more hype and being more like the risk of overvaluation?
Just overall in terms of...
Yeah, like where if you were allocating money right now and you are, let's just say you, for example, your primary consideration for whatever reason was valuation. Where do you, are there pockets of opportunity, things you're worried about?
It's a good question. Look, I think overall there's, long-term growth with a lot of innovation. I'm not too sort of concerned with it. But, whenever investors sort of ask me and talk to me, go, look, when we're looking for sort of pockets where we believe in AI, we believe in innovation, but, Billy, let me know where there's better valuation. And, that's why we sort of sometimes talk about China as well. There's a lot of innovation that's happening in China, not just in AI, robotics, etc. And where the valuations are trading at probably 30 to 40% below the global counterpart, what they're trading at. So, if it's more of a valuation edge or valuation angle, there is that geographical split or that you could look at in China. And, again, that, entails diversification, and there's also benefits there as well.
I'll put a link in the show notes to all of the funds that we've mentioned today. Probably one question, if you've got time, that I will ask you is more for like a bold call. Like, so we've got the three buckets, right, that exist. And I get this is kind of like a false choice because I'm asking you to pick one, right? But if you took a 10-year view, where do you think the most fruitful returns would come from for investors listening to this?
Yeah. So again, look, this is a circular motion in terms of innovation, but I would really, really tilt in the next 10 years towards the adoption phase. I think there's going to be a lot of commercialization. We've talked about robotics becoming much more AI. I have a thesis where one of the next sort of monetization will come from home robotics, people helping you out at home, with your shopping or whatever it is. So I do believe that sort of large segment, that sort of hardware infrastructure, that sort of adopting segment is going to be where the money is made in the next decade. And that's where I would sort of tilt towards in the whole value chain.
Okay, so then from that, what's the first ETF that we should research if we're going to research that?
I think, definitely look at the GXAI as a whole because it's mostly software. Look, FANG has obviously the top counterparts. We also have a China Tech ETF, which comprises of most of the Chinese innovative names, which is called Dragon, DRGN. So I'll probably look into more sort of GXAI, FANG, and Dragon. And obviously, we've still got the tail end of infrastructure, which you can look at as well. But those three will be probably what I focus on.
I really like that, Billy. I do have more and more automation going on at home.
Nice.
I do. And I can see it coming down the pike. Like there's more to come. So I really enjoyed this chat, mate. And
likewise.
Once again, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.